Now, the man planning to make medical history with the first ever head transplant is speaking to fellow medics at a conference later today.
Italian surgeon Sergio Canavero's plan has already stoked controversy, with some arguing that the procedure is effectively humans playing God.
Well, here to debate this is the consultant neurosurgeon Matthew Crocker. He's joining us in the studio. And from Westminster, we are joined by Marie Fahy. She is from Catholic Voices. And I'll start with you, Marie, if I might, because having been raised a Catholic myself, many people may think that the Catholic Church, very conservative, might actually be opposed to this, but you are supporting this.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm supporting it. What I would support is the fact that the Catholic Church has always looked to science and been a pioneer of science. And if you look at transplants in general, Pope Pius XII actually preempted it happening by saying that he would support it before it was, a reality at all. And that's organ transplants. And the Catholic Church of all the countries has the highest. Catholic countries have the highest donation of organs for people who need them. The issue with this case is that there's a few issues. Firstly, it's why it's being done. I think there's a lot of questions from the medical community about whether it's actually possible. At the moment, they are unable, as far as I know, to fix a spinal cord injury, and this procedure, the doctor says, will actually be able to transplant a head onto another body, which is alive. Now, many of his opponents are saying that actually this really is impossible, and what you're doing is somebody who is desperate, somebody who has a terrible illness, is being sort of sold a false hope. And I don't know the surgeon myself, but
Sure.
it's you have to ask, why is he doing it? And there must be other ways, and we haven't got, that it's 100 years' time before we actually have the ability to do that, according to most of the other scientific data that we have.
Well, Marie, let me bring in Matthew Crocker at this moment, because you are obviously an expert. You're a doctor yourself, a consultant, no less, neurosurgeon. How seriously should we be taking these claims by Sergio Canavero that this is possible to do? And we were hearing about issues with the spinal cord there.
Well, I don't think it's likely to work as a medical exercise. It's been tried in animal models as operations in the medical community are, when they're very novel, and it hasn't worked in animal models, and it hasn't been repeatedly tried in animal models because the first attempts many, many years ago were a resounding failure, in that the animal head was kept alive by the donor body. And we need to refer to it, I think it's better to refer to it as a body transplant rather than a head transplant. There's a donor body being grafted onto the head of the recipient. And so the donor bodies in the animal models kept the head alive, but there was no neurological function of the spinal cord or the associated nerves, and hence the experiment was a failure, and the animal was either died or was put to sleep after a day or two.
So why is this Italian scientist, medical man, the man who wants to perform this individual, why is he being taken seriously then by the community?
Well, I'm not sure that he is.
Right.
There is a society, there is a world watching him, and to whom he has made himself available and publicised himself, and they are interested in it because it captures the public imagination, as did the first heart transplant, as have various medical developments throughout history. But in terms of the medical credibility of his work, I think it's profoundly lacking.
Okay.
Marie, there's some real questions about ethics here. Very similar questions being asked with regards to the story that we've been covering today about this young girl that wanted to be frozen. Even if it was possible, is it right? Is it the right course of action to take?
On the girl that's in the news this morning?
Well, on the girls on the news this morning, and also on this story as well. I mean, the arguments for and against are probably very similar for both cases.
Yeah.
So in terms of, the head transplant, because it's possible, whether it's 50 years down the line, 100 years down the line, is it the right thing to do?
I think it's only the right thing to do if it can be proved to be beneficial for the person who is actually receiving the transplant, and there is no damage to anybody else. For example, when someone gives a heart, that person is already dead, so there's going to be they are able to offer that thing for the good of somebody else. However, with this situation, there's loads of ethical questions, particularly around the identity of a person. For example, if somebody was able to have a head transplant and then they went on to have children, would the children be the children of the body, or would they be the children of the head? And that affects society, because it also affects grandparents, cousins, everybody else involved. And like all of these things, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, because looking at everything in science, they are open to abuse. And again, if it were possible, you could see down the line a situation where people want to have a, as the doctor said, a body transplant because they don't like the physical attributes of their body. You could see a situation where poorer people are being exploited for the richer people who could pay for such things. There are endless possibilities. And what the church has always said is that there's no point in pursuing something before we've asked the ethical questions, and I think that's the mistake being made here. Maybe in the future it's something that could be done safely. At the moment it isn't. At the moment there's too many chances for it to be corrupted, and for that reason you have to play safe and you have to protect the people who have no voice, which are the people who are vulnerable.
OK, and Matthew Crocker, you'd expect somebody from a religious perspective to raise concerns about the ethics of it. What about from your perspective?
Well, I'm not sure that the ethics of it are particularly different from the ethics of organ transplantation as they exist, and we've got a well-recognised process for organ transplantation. Again, we've got to stop calling this thing a head transplant. It's not a head transplant. It's a body transplant. Yeah. And the body, in this case, is being used as a composite organ. And composite organ transplants are established. They're not very common, but they are established. There's a heart-lung transplant programme, and a heart-lung transplant is a composite organ. People have arm transplants, face transplants. So the idea of a composite organ transplant is not a new one, and a body transplant is simply an extension of that. The ethical issues are, yes, they're about the exploitation of the individual concerned, and there are, and I think they're being sold a false hope. The other ethical issue, which I've mentioned before, is the issue that there is a donor body that's going to be used in this procedure, which comprises a number of organ systems which could alternatively be used in very, very well-established, well-regulated and highly effective, incredibly effective programmes to revolutionise people's lives who are on dialysis, with a kidney transplant, 2 kidney transplants from a donor body, one assumes. Livers can be split, so that's 1 or 2 liver transplants, heart, lungs, pancreas, cornea, the whole lot, whereas all of that will be kept as a single package and transplanted into something which has no prospect of medical success. So there's a terrible ethical issue regarding the use of a healthy, otherwise healthy donor body, aside from the other things that have been mentioned.
Absolutely fascinating to talk to both of you. Matthew Crocker, consultant neurosurgeon, and Marie Fahy from Catholic Voices. Thank you both very much for lending your voices to that debate for us this morning.